Hey everybody! Hey, hey, hey! I'm Tony D. This is Tony D Music Channel, and today I want to talk to you about the brand new documentary film Peter Asher, Everywhere Man. Now, I should say before I talk more about this that this is only playing in select theaters if you're honored enough to be in one of those cities with a select theater. So, unfortunately, you can't see it in just any theater. It's only in certain theaters that play special films of this nature. But anyway, let's talk about Peter Asher's film Everywhere Man documentary. Now, I didn't know that much about Peter Asher before getting into this. I, of course, knew the song A World Without Love, the song that Paul McCartney wrote for him. And I knew that he produced James Taylor, and I knew that he was getting an arm man at Apple before he quit Apple because of Alan Klein. And for years, I've been enjoying his radio show From Me to You on the Beatles channel greatly. But I learned 50% more about Peter Asher from this documentary than I did before. And I love how this film starts off with Peter Asher's childhood, and I didn't know before that he started out as a child actor. I didn't know that at all. He and his sister Jane Asher started out as child actors. Of course, Jane Asher stuck with it much longer than he did. And his other sister, I think her name was Chloe. I don't remember, but there was a really funny moment where he was showing a little headshot of all three of the Asher children, and on the headshot, it just says all three of them are redheaded. And I love how in this documentary it's interspersed with snippets of Peter Asher at this concert called A Memoir Live or whatever it was called. And so he's live, both performing his songs and also showing old video footage and talking about his life. And there's also new footage, new interview footage of him talking to famous people like Eric Idle, Steve Martin, and others. There's also footage of him recording his radio show with Twiggy, for example, who I know nothing about. I don't know who in the world Twiggy is. I don't know. Um, I thought Twiggy was a cartoon owl. I don't know about Twiggy. But and I loved how again, I know very little about Peter and Gordon. I know very little. But now I know that every song of theirs that became a hit was written by Paul McCartney. And based on this documentary, it seemed like despite John Lennon being credited on those songs, like he had no input at all, because we know the infamous story about how John hated the first line of the song, A World Without Love, so lock me away. And John would say, okay, go ahead, lock me away. Now, now in this documentary, it's so amazing because Peter Asher was able to play for everybody the demo of Paul's version of A World Without Love, because he wrote it and then he would record a rough demo to send it to Peter Asher to show him how to sing it, and we heard his demo of that. And again, with Paul being the genius that he is, and you know John Lennon and George Harrison being the brilliant songwriters that they were, that they could just write songs for other artists in 5, 10 minutes or so, and then it's a hit. I mean, if Paul only wrote A World Without Love or only wrote those other songs from Peter Asher and Gordon Waller, he would still be remembered as a fantastic songwriter. But because he did that, and also the Beatles and Wings and solo, we remember him for the Beatles and Wings and his solo career. And then the Peter Asher stuff is just a footnote. And so it's discussed that he went to private school and met this guy, Gordon Waller, and they were heavily influenced by the Everly Brothers, much like the Beatles and almost everybody at that time. to form a singing duo, which they did. And because his sister Jane Asher was dating Paul McCartney, and I really enjoy how in this film we find out exactly how Jane Asher met Paul McCartney, because she was on this TV show called Jukebox Jury, where celebrities hear brand new singles. They decide, will it be a hit? Will it be a miss? Which sounds just so funny to me, and I can't imagine a contemporary version of that show being on now. I mean, if that was on now, it would be very weird and possibly trashy and all those things. And it's and of course the Beatles were on that show a lot, all four of them. In the book Way Beyond Compare by John Wynne, you can see transcripts of the Beatles being on that show. But anyway, Jane Asher was on that show as a famous actress, and so was Paul one night, and that's how they met. Because Paul, since he was a teenager, he was just setting his sights on meeting pretty girls. And of course, as a famous Brit, he was able to do that. Now, what the film didn't mention is that, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When Jane Asher met John, he said something very inappropriate about wanking and masturbating. So she did not like him, but she liked Paul a lot more. So she ended up dating Paul for for a while. And so because Jane Asher was Peter's sister and she was dating Paul, Paul would live in their house with Jane Asher and her two parents. Her father was a physician who coined the disease known as Munchausen syndrome, where a psychologically ill person will pretend to have an illness so people take pity on them. I think that's the gist of it. And her mother was Margaret Asher, a music teacher. And I knew this before the film, but we find out in the film also that one of her students that she taught oboe to was George Martin. And then there's a great little clip where George Martin is reunited with Mrs. Asher in this century. It's really, really sweet. And of course, Peter Asher was there the night that John and Paul wrote I Want to Hold Your Hand, the classic hit song. And Paul offered to play it for Peter, who was there. So he didn't see it being written, but he saw it being performed before it was a huge hit song that changed everything. And I really like this interview that we saw for the first time, where some reporter in 1964 or so asked Paul, how does it feel to have a Beatles song in the hit charts, or have a Beatles song be a big hit right now, and also the song you wrote for Peter Asher be a big hit? I mean, who could possibly think of having two hit songs that you've written in the top 10 or so? It's so amazing. And yeah, it's mentioned that there were other songs Paul wrote for Peter Asher. There was I Don't Want to See You Again, which I'm quite certain is just Paul wrote it. John didn't, because it just sounds like a Paul song, not a John song. And then there's the song Woman that Paul wrote for Peter Asher and Gordon, which is fascinating. That's called Woman. And then 15 years in 1980, John Lennon wrote a classic song called Woman. And then it gets into how in 1967, Gordon and Gordon and Peter have been doing the same thing for the past 3 years or so. And Gordon got tired of it, and Gordon quit the band, the duo. And I forget his name, but this guy from the group Manfred Mann quit the group, quit Manfred Mann, and then wanted to go solo, and did this cover of a Bee Gees song, I think. And he wanted Peter Asher to produce it, even though he had literally no experience producing songs. But Peter Asher, not being someone to quit, to be helpless, he did it. He arranged a cover of that song, which I can't remember which song it was now. And then that's what started off his whole producing career. Well, not exactly, but anyway. And then a year later, in '68, is when Paul and John announced Apple Records, the record label created by the Beatles. And the plan for that was basically what Paul called Western communism, where anybody can just create a record, create a film, a book, without having to, quote unquote, get on their knees and beg. That was his vision for it anyway. It didn't work out that way. But they wanted Peter Asher to be an A&R man to sign new acts to the label and find new artists. And the very first act they signed was James Taylor. And in '68, his self-titled album, James Taylor, came out on the label. And I've heard a few of those songs, and I quite like them a lot. I like his cover of Caroline on My Mind. I like the song he wrote, Something in the Way She Moves, and obviously Something in the Way She Moves. George Harrison used that line a year later for the classic song Something. But unfortunately, in '69, John Lennon argued with Paul about who to become the next Beatles manager, and John got his way and was Alan Klein, who basically ruined Apple Records by firing a whole bunch of the staff. And so when Peter Asher saw this and James Taylor, they both hated Alan Klein, and so they quit. They quit Apple Records and they moved to America in Los Angeles, California. And then Peter and James Taylor found home at Warner Bros. Records. And from then on, James Taylor's albums were released on Warner Brothers. And I don't know much of James Taylor's music. I like him. I remember when I was 23 or so, I listened to Sweet Baby James, his solo album, and I bought it about 4 years later. And I like it. I like the songs on there. I like some of his stuff. He's never been a singer-songwriter that strongly appealed to me. He's someone who's great at covers. But to me, I need someone who's more than that, who not just sings songs really well, but also writes about their own life and bears their heart and their soul to the audience. But anyway, so in the '70s, James Taylor and Linda Ronstadt became Peter Asher's greatest hit makers. He started working with Linda a few years after that, and he figured out this great formula for her where he'd give her a classic song to cover, and she would just completely rearrange it and make it her own, similar to the Beatles. And her covers became great hits. Her cover of Buddy Holly's It's So Easy, her cover of You're No Good is a fantastic song. I can't remember all of them, but in the '70s, James Taylor won. I think James Taylor won a Grammy for Album of the Year because of Peter Asher production. I think so. I know that Linda Ronstadt did because of one of her albums produced by Peter Asher, because there's video in this documentary of her winning the Grammy and thanking Peter Asher. Now, of course, I'm forgetting her name, but there was a woman that Peter Asher met in the '60s and ended up marrying. But then by the late '70s, there's no more love in their marriage, and it's even mentioned in this film that James Taylor wrote a song about about their marriage ending. And like I said, I don't know much about James Taylor's music, but now I want to hear. I want to hear this song, which I know is on the album called JT, which I think is from '77 or so. I just think it's funny using your initials as the name of the album. And I forgot to mention about Indica Books, that Peter Asher and Barry Miles founded in '66. It was this underground bookstore in England. And Paul McCartney helped out with setting that up because that was something he was interested in. And it's mentioned in an interview in this film that indica is what cannabis is made of. That's why it was called indica. And yeah, then after we get into Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor, then they just quickly do a montage of all the hit albums and hit artists that Peter Asher produced. I couldn't even keep track of all of them. Um, Lyle Lovett and God, I can't remember all the others. Now, of course, one of my favorites is behind me on my wall, Ringo Starr. I think he produced just one track of Ringo's on the album Time Takes Time. I think it was the cover of the song Golden Blunders. It might have been two songs on that album. I think it was just one. Unfortunately, there wasn't any interview with Ringo about that. And there was a brief interview with Natalie Merchant from the band 10,000 Maniacs, which Peter Asher produced I think it was two of their albums. And she was just saying how great it was working with him and how in her mind pop music is all about making these 3-minute songs that make people happy. And the most surprising fact about Peter Asher is that he produced a comedy album, a stand-up comedy album for Robin Williams, the Robin Williams. Obviously, producing a comedy album is completely different from producing an album of new music or old music, because he's just sifting through a recording of a stand-up show or several stand-up shows and selecting the best, funniest bits, and all that. And yeah, it's so great that we see footage of Rob Williams winning the Grammy for Best Comedy Album, and then he's at some swanky party and he sees Peter Asher there. And it's mentioned in this film several times that Peter Asher always had very flashy fashion and suits. And there's just, again, Robin Williams was always on. He was always funny. And he jokes that, oh, Peter, he dresses so flashy. Even a gay leprechaun would say, oh, that's too much. Very funny. And again, another comedy icon that Peter Asher worked with was Steve Martin. When Steve Martin did his bluegrass thing. See, now I'm blanking on what the name of the bluegrass band was. Steve Martin and the something. But anyway, there's such a great little interview with both Peter Asher and Steve Martin. And the interview was asking them, what's it like when you took risks in your career, like producing this or making this bluegrass thing? And both of them just said, oh, there was no risk involved. We just wanted to do something else. And I love this interview with Peter Asher and Eric Idle, where they're talking about the song that Paul McCartney wrote for him, "A World Without Love," and how John hated the first lyric. And Peter Asher just says, oh, yeah, he despised it. And yeah, this film does what I like so much about documentaries about people who are legends but are still living, where you see so much footage of Peter Asher now, and you see footage from this live concert he did about his life, and you see a lot of great footage of him with his daughter. I think her name was Veronica, maybe Victoria, but I don't remember. It was last week. And they're just walking around London, walking by Abbey Road, and fans see them and they want a photo with him. He's very flattered by it. And yeah, so many nice moments. I don't remember if his second wife was in this. Obviously, he married again because he has a child who is now maybe 40 years old. She looks like she's 40. Yeah, as I said, I learned so much about Peter Asher in this film. And I was just thinking about how, in the very beginning of this film, there's a quote on screen from Peter Asher that life is not about luck, but about um, but about taking opportunities when they're given to you. I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember every detail in this film, but that's my paraphrase of this. But yeah, basically know how to take opportunities when they're given to you in life instead of thinking that you can just use luck. And yeah, I like that they showed a clip of Paul McCartney giving a speech to induct James Taylor in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because I'm so nostalgic for those clips from the Hall of Fame ceremonies from 20, 30 years ago because it was so much better back then than it is now. I haven't even seen any of the ceremonies from Hall of Fame in 7 years because I just think it's so silly who they're inducting now and all that. And I think I'm trying to remember now. I think Peter Asher is elected as a producer in the Hall of Fame. I don't recall right now. And I was just thinking during this whole thing that how inspiring it is that Peter Asher didn't just sit around and hope for something lucky to happen. He took every opportunity he got, and most of that's he was because he was because his sister was Jane Asher and she was dating Paul McCartney. If Paul didn't write those songs that became hits for Peter and Gordon, none of that other stuff in his career would have happened. So perhaps we should be saying how wonderful Paul McCartney is for making Peter Asher a hit singer and then later a producer of hits. Now, I met Peter Asher at the Festival of Fans a year ago, and I got his autograph, I think, on the program, and he was interviewed and performed some of his songs. And he clearly seems like someone very humble and somebody that's just very flattered to be as famous as he is, which I find so refreshing because there are so many celebrities more famous than he is with a very large ego and a large amount of arrogance. It's good to know he is not that way. And this is the kind of documentary film that is so heartwarming for me, and the kind of film that I would be thrilled to go see a second time, a third time, a fourth time, and then probably again until I see it 8 times until I'm broke. Now, the one thing that I will say is very sad about this is that Linda Ronstadt, current day Linda Ronstadt, is interviewed in this film, and she has Parkinson's disease, and you can tell because her voice just sounds off. Something about her voice just sounds really, I'm just going to say sad. It sounds sad the way she speaks now with Parkinson's. I worry about her. I really do. Because I know personally what Parkinson's does to somebody. So, I just want to say to Peter Asher, you are the everyman. You have done such an incredible job of producing great music, however you've done it. And so thank you. And your film is just so heartwarming and magical and wonderful. And that's all I got to say about that. Thank you for watching. Look online if this film is playing at a special theater in your city or state. And if it is, go see it and you will thank me later. Thank you.